Yeah, so we're starting the continuation of the Gemara, which says as follows. Where are we up to? We finished all the way up to the two dots. The two dots which says Sar, it's about 12 lines up from the bottom of the page. Sar, Kavoi, B'shvut, over Masmer. We learned in the Mishnah. We're now going over to a little bit about Sar. Sar was the payment, that one of the 5 payments you make when you're Choyva B'chaveiroi, and we said it's the pain that's given. And the Mishnah gave an example of burning somebody with a hot metal stick, with a shpud, or a masmer, or you hurt him with a nail, vafilu al tzipornoi, even on his fingernail, mokum she'einu oise chabura, a place where it doesn't make a chabura. Then we say how much. The Mishnah says how you make the evaluation. That's going to be maybe the second sugi we'll learn today. Fine. But the bottom line is the Mishnah said there's a payment of tsar even when there was no nezek involved. Nezek, we said, when a person's value goes down in the slave market, but if someone who gets a little bit of a burn, a bit of a pain on his fingernail, his value doesn't change in the slave market at all, right? So there is no payment of nezek for such a case. However, there is a payment of tsar because the guy was inflicted with pain, and you pay for that. But what comes out from the Mishnah is tsar shaloi b'makom nezek mishtale. That's how we just read. That's what we read in the Gemara. Tsar shaloi b'makom nezek mishtale man tana. Who is this tana who holds that you pay for tsar even when there is no nezek? And now we're going to get into a little bit of an interesting, tricky kind of thing. So let's try and see if we can clear it up. Omar Rava ben Azai. This is the opinion of Ben Azai. Ben Azai is the opinion, says Rava in the beginning, that you can pay tsar without nezek. Right, Desanya. Rebbe Yomi, this is a brisa. We're going to explain this brisa in one way, and then in the end we're going to explain it in a different way. So the brisa says, Rebbe Yomi, kvia nemra tchila. Rebbe says it said kvia first. Ben Azai Yomi chabura nemra tchila. Rebbe says it said chabura first. Now what on earth exactly are they talking about? So there is a pasuk which says, the pasuk which we're going on is as follows: Kviya tachas kviya. How do the Art Scott translate kviya? A burn. I think it's a burn. So the pasuk says kviya. I'm just reading the pasuk now that I've got on the side of my Gemara Shmois in Parshas Mishpatim. Kviya tachas kviya, petza tachas petza, chabura tachas chabura. So kviya is a burn. What's important for us right now is a kviya is a burn. And a chabura is like a bruise, when there's a bruise in the skin. Now the question is over here, if you can have when the Torah says burn, there's two kinds of burns. There's a burn that doesn't cause a chabura, doesn't cause a bruise, cause maybe a slight something, and there's a higher level of a burn which caused a bruise. Now the question is when the Torah says in the beginning, kviya tachas kviya, right, a burn in the place of a burn, is that referring to a burn with a bruise? Or a burn without a bruise? That's going to be subject to dispute. So let's see. So the words of the brisa are, yes, parents.
A bruise usually means that you discourage because of internal bleeding. With a burn, you get what we call blisters.
Right.
Skin, it goes funny, or it.
Right, but obviously there's a kind of a burn that will.
The burn is one form of itching.
Right, it's true.
And a bruise is another bruise. So when you say
a burn would not make a bruise. A burn.
Yeah.
Right, that's what Peretz is saying.
Yeah.
It seems I don't exactly know the full Metzius over here, but there are obviously some burns that cause maybe not what we classically define as a bruise, but cause a deeper roshem, a deeper impression into the skin. Right. So maybe right. But there is a more severe kind of burn which will cause some sort of internal damage. So the question over here, as we'll see in the Gemara, the question over here is going to be how much is this internal damage? So the Brisa says, Rebbe says kviya nemra tchila. Rebbe holds that it first said kviya, and Ben Azai says that it first said chabura. Now, what do you mean it first said? What does it mean it first said? I just read you the pasuk. It says kviya tachas kviya, petza tachas petza, chabura tachas chabura. So what do they mean? That's what the Gemara says. B'mai kamifli. What exactly are Rebbe? It's a bit of a cryptic brisa. What are Rebbe and Rebbe Azai talking about when one says kviya, it said first, and Ben Azai said Chabura is said first. So the Gemara says like this: Rebbe Sava Kviya the lace ba Chabura mashma. Rebbe holds that actually when the Torah says the word Kviya, when I would read the pasuk Kviya, that's a burn without it's mashma without a Chabura, right? It's mashma, as I said before. I'll use the terms of the Gemara, even though we'll define them as what we just said. Kviya without a Chabura is some sort of scab or some sort of more surf or more on the surface. That's the kaviyah without a chabura, and a kaviyah with a chabura is a more deep kaviyah, which does cause some sort of, if not true bruise, some sort of internal damage. So Rebbe holds that when the Torah said kaviyah, the lace ba chabura mashma. And just one more hakdama I'll give is that obviously it's more serious a kaviyah with a chabura. A kaviyah with a chabura means that it's caused internal damage. That's more serious, and that's more logical that you would pay for that, right? It's more chomer, we'd say. It's more chomer. Whereas a kaviyah, a burn without a chabura, is less. It should be more makel. So let's see. Rebbe holds kaviyah the lace ba chabura mashma. Rebbe holds that when the Torah said the word kaviyah, it's mashma that there was no chabura involved. When you first read the pasuk kaviyah tachas kaviyah, Rebbe holds that's without a chabura. That's more chomer. It's without a chabura, right? I'm saying it's more chomer because if you're gonna have to pay for that, that's a big chumrah, even though there's no chabura. Fine. Kosav Rachmana Chabura. Then the Torah in the end of the pasuk says the word Chabura. Now, why is the Torah repeating Chabura again? Why does it need to say that? We already know that you're chayiv for kaviyah for a burn without a Chabura. Kal v'choyme, you're going to be chayiv for a burn with a Chabura. So why did the Torah write the word Chabura? Legluye Allah, the kaviyah to isba Chabura in Eloi Loi. We'll use the end of the pasuk to be megale on the beginning of the pasuk. The Torah at the end of the pasuk said Chabura. That's megala that the kaviyah in the beginning is also referring to with a chabura. In other words, Rebbe's shita is the first time you read the pasuk, I would think it's kaviyah even without a chabura. The Torah is being very machmir, telling you to pay even though there's no chabura, even just made a surface burn on the skin, you still pay. But if that will be true, then we don't understand how the end of the pasuk says chabura tachas chabura, which means even when you do a more serious thing with a chabura, you pay. But that's obvious. We can learn that from a kavachoyme. If for the lighter case you have to pay, for sure for the more severe case. So therefore we use as counter logic. Therefore that tells me that the beginning of the pasuk is also only referring to a kaviyah with a chabura. So at the end of the day, according to Rebbe, at this point in the Gemara, you're only going to be chayiv a kaviyah with a chabura. That means to say that just kaviyah with chabura means that there'll be nezek also, and not just kaviyah without a chabura is only tsar. I think that's also another hakdama I maybe should have said. Kaviyah by itself without a chabura is what the Gemara is calling only tsar. A little bit on the fingernail, right? A bit on the fingernail, no damage done. That's only tsar. Rebbe does not, at the end of the day, Rebbe does not hold you pay for that. If it's only tsar, you won't pay. Only when it's kaviyah with a chabura, then you will pay. Yes, Baruch. Yeah, the Kavachim started like this. If I had the right word, I would maybe have written it. First thing it says in the pasuk is kaviyah. The end of the pasuk it says chabura, basically, right? There's something in between, but we'll leave that thing in between a minute. It starts with kaviyah, petza, and then it ends with chabura. Now, when you first of all start reading the pasuk of kaviyah, do you understand that is referring to a kaviyah with a chabura or a kaviyah without a chabura? Now, that's the point of dispute. 1 second. Rebbe understands that this kaviyah is talking about without a chabura. He reads a kaviyah is without a chabura. So the first time you would see that Rebbe understands you pay for a kaviyah without a chabura. The problem is you get to the end of the pasuk, and the end of the pasuk says chabura. Now, I could have learned chabura from a kavachoyme from the beginning of the pasuk. If you're chayiv only on a kaviyah without a chabura, then kavachoyme is going to be chayiv for the end of the pasuk. So then why did the Torah write chabura at the end of the pasuk? That's the limit to tell me you're only chayiv when there is a chabura. That's megala, what we call megala on the beginning of the pasuk on kaviyah. When we get to the end of the pasuk chabura, we say, chabura, that must tell me, because we wouldn't need it to tell me chabura because of a kavachoyme. If from kaviyah, it must come and tell me that even the kaviyah, you're only chayiv with a chabura. That's Rebbe's opinion. So therefore, at this point in time, Rebbe's only mechayiv you for kaviyah with a chabura, and therefore, when there's only kaviyah, only tsar, he wouldn't say you pay. That's Rebbe. 1 second. Let's just see Ben Azai. Ben Azai says the opposite. Ben Azai yoime chabura nemra tchila. He holds the chabura nemra tchila. What does it mean, chabura nemra tchila? It means to say, sorry, I was reading the wrong part. Sorry, Ben Azai sava kaviyah to is ba chabura mashma. Ben Azai starts from a different place. Ben Azai holds when you read the pasuk of kviya, the first thing he thinks of when he sees kviya, he understands the pashtus. He understands kviya is with a chabura. That's how Ben Azai understood. Kviyas come with chaburas; they come together. So now, kosav rachmana chabura. So now, why did the Torah write chabura? If we know already kviya is with a chabura from the beginning of the pasuk, why did the Torah write chabura at the end of the pasuk? The answer is also leglui Allah the kviya delays by chabura. That must be megale that the kviya in the beginning is actually without a chabura. So it all depends on where you start from. It's a little bit confusing, but it depends where you start from. Let's just speak about Ben Azai a second. Ben Azai started off learning kviyas with the chabura. Kviyas with the chabura. And then he gets to the end of the pasuk, it says chabura. But 1 second, we just said that kviyas with the chabura. So it must be telling you, chabura must be telling me that this kviya is really without a chabura. So at the end of the day, according to Ben Azai, you're chayiv for kviya without a chabura, a burn without the internal damage, and that's called tsar alone, and that actually fits with our Mishnah. Because again, our Mishnah said if you prick someone or burn someone on their finger nail and cause only tsar and no nezek, you're chayiv for tsar without nezek. That was what the Mishnah said. You're chayiv for tsar without nezek. Who is that according to? It can't be going according to Rebbe, because at the end of the day, Rebbe holds that a kviya needs a chabura. A burn needs to have some sort of internal damage, needs to have some nezek involved. If it would just be tsar by itself, you wouldn't be liable. So the Mishnah doesn't fit with Rebbe. The Mishnah only fits with Ben Azai. Ben Azai said at the end of the day that the kviya of the parsha is without a chabura. It's without a chabura, and you're chayiv for that, and therefore you're chayiv for tsar without nezek. It's a bit confusing in the Shitas, but is it more or less? Yeah, without a chabura.
Sort of hard to understand.
That's what I said. In terms of the question of the Metzias, let's leave that on the side a bit. We'll go with the terms of the Gemara. The terms of the Gemara is a burn without a chabura, which we're saying is not more superficial on the skin, which is or maybe on the fingernail. It's only tsar, and there's a kviya with more internal damage, which is nezek as well.
Can we say that this ending is serious? It's going to automatically happen.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. I'm happy to say that. It's more serious with the chabura. So what depended on is where you started from. Let's just summarize for 1 second. Rebbe started from the fact that kviya is without a chabura, and it's going to end up being with a chabura. And Ben Azai started that kviya was with a chabura, and it ends up being without a chabura. In other words, the way they started off the mashmois before the pasuk, in the end of the day, changes from the end of the pasuk. So just to summarize, Rebbe started off that the kviya is without a chabura, and then if that's true, it's without a chabura. So why kal v'chomer with a chabura? So why does the Torah say chabura? Must be to teach me that you're only chayav with a chabura. So that was why the Mishnah doesn't fit with Rebbe, because the Mishnah says you can get tsar by itself. Whereas Ben Azai started off the opposite. Ben Azai started off that everything was in from the beginning, a chabura, a kviya with a chabura. So why does the Torah write a chabura at the end? Must be to be megale that here the Torah is saying a kviya without a chabura. That's what the Gemara is saying over here. Then the Gemara says, Maskiv lo rapop. Yeah, if that was confusing, then this will be double as confusing. Maskiv lo rapop. Adarabo ipcha mistabra. The exact opposite is going to be true. The exact opposite is going to be true. But let me just stress one more thing. We always have to put it back into the words of the Brisa, right? The words of the Brisa were Rebbe oimek kviya nemrot chila. Kviya nemrot chila. So, lefi this explanation of Rava, it means to say that the first time I read the pasuk, it means kviya without the chabura. According to Rebbe, the first time you read it was a kviya by itself. It ended up being a kviya with a chabura once you read the full pasuk. But the first time you read it, it's kviya without a chabura. So actually, Rebbe is referring to when he says the words kviya nemrot chila, he means to say before I read the end of the pasuk, I would have understood that the kviya is by itself. And Ben Azai says chabura nemrot chila means to say that before I read the end of the pasuk, I would have said that the kviya is with a chabura, but the end of the day ends up being without a chabura. So all I mean to stress is that Rebbe and Ben Azai are speaking about what would be before you read the end of the pasuk. When Rebbe says kviya ne'emrot chila means before you read the end of the pasuk, I would have said it's only a kviya. And Ben Azai says before I read the end of the pasuk, it would have been with a chabura. But that actually changes. When you read the end of the pasuk, Rebbe's mechayev only with a chabura, Ben Azai without. Fine. Now the Gemara is asking on that, Ipcha Mistavra. Rashi explains two reasons why Ipka is mistabra. Number one, it comes out the way we're saying that the Mishnah does not fit with Rebbe. As you know, Rebbe is the author of the Mishnahs, right? Rebbe Yehuda Nasi, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, he's the author of the Mishnahs, and it's not always good to say that the Mishnah doesn't fit with him. Because right now, the Rava's answer, the Mishnah only fits with Ben Azai. Ben Azai is the only one that says that you can have tsar without nezik, because you can have a kviya without a chabura. But Rebbe holds you need kviya with a chabura. So the Mishnah doesn't fit with Rebbe. That's not very good. And also, one problem, one flaw with this pshat of Rava is that it comes out that, like I just said, the terms that Rebbe and Ben Azai are using are not accurate. They're actually only according to before you read the end of the verse. Before you read the end of the verse, Rebbe says it's it's without a chabura, and Ben Azai holds it's with. But once you read the end of the verse, they changed their opinions, so they weren't speaking very accurately. That's why it's not mistavra. We'll see the way the Gemara is going to explain now. It does end up being more accurate. Let's see. Rebbe Oimer Kviya. I'm just told that the line starts, the fifth line from the bottom. Ipka mistavra. The opposite should be true. Rebbe Oimer Kviya Nemra Tchila. Rebbe in the Braisa said Kviya Nemra Tchila. He really is going. We're going to flip around the opinions. He's really going to hold Sava Kviya to Isbei Chabura Mashma. He holds the Kviya's got a Chabura with it. The first time we read the pasuk now, Rebbe holds it comes with a Chabura. Kosav Rachmana Chabura. So why the Torah write Chabura? We already said Chabura in the beginning of the pasuk. Legluye Allah, to be Megale on it, the Kviya, the lace for Chabura. Must be to be Megale that the beginning of the pasuk is a Kviya without the Chabura. So that's now Rebbe's opinion. Rebbe's now the one who holds you can have a kviya without a chabura and you're chayav for that. And therefore, at this point in time, the Mishnah will fit with Rebbe because you can be chayav on tsar without nezek. And also, that's what Rebbe meant when he said kviya nemra tchila. He wasn't going on, so to speak, the havamina. He was going on the maskana. Once you read the end of the pasuk and you see chabura, that's megale that the kviya in the beginning is without a chabura. So when Rebbe said in the Braisa, Kviya Nemra Tchila, he's not referring to before you read the end of the pasuk. He's referring to the liable the emes. At the end of it, once you finish reading the pasuk, Kviya ends up being without a chabura. So therefore, Rebbe is the Mishnah. Ben Azai Oimer Chabura Nemra Tchila. Ben Azai now is the opposite of what we said above. Ben Azai starts off the Chabura Nemra Tchila Sava Kviya the Leis Bo Chabura Mashma. He holds that when the Torah said Kviya the first time when you'd read it, when the Torah says kviya, it's without a chabura, right? It's without a chabura, and therefore you're chayiv even without a chabura because of rachmana chabura, the glui Allah. So then, why did the Torah write chabura? You could done a kavachoyme. If you're chayiv without a chabura, why does the Torah need to say with the chabura? It's to be megale. Therefore, the kviya the islay chabura in. Sorry, islay chabura in iloi loi. But amaskana kaime. And when Rebbe and Ben Azai were using these terms in the Braisa, they were referring to the maskana, meaning after the Torah wrote kviya and after the Torah wrote chabura. Then what do you learn at the end of the day? That's what they argue about. Rebbe says at the end of the day you have a kviya in and of itself without the chabura. Therefore you can have tsar without nezek. And then Azai says no, you have to have tsar with nezek because kviya has got in it a chabura. That's the more confusing part of the Gemara done. But what's important is at least to understand the style of what's going on. In terms of the style was, there's a problem in the verse. There's basically a problem in the verse because either way around there's a problem in the verse. If kviya in the beginning sounds like, let's say kviya is without a chabura. It's without a chabura. You chayav for kviya without a chabura. So then kavachoyme with a chabura, right? So why does the Torah have to write chabura in the end of the end of the pasuk? So that way would teach me that even though kviya started without a chabura, the chabura at the end teaches me that you need the chabura. That will be one way to learn. And that's why I say it's the opposite, because you started off holding kviya was without a chabura. But you're going to end up holding that you only have a kviya with a chabura because the Torah at the end wrote chabura. Or the other way to learn is to learn the opposite. You're starting off understanding that kviya is with a chabura. And you only chayav with a kviya, with a burn that caused a chabura more internal. So then why did the Torah write again chabura? Why did it write again chabura? We just defined kviya as a kviya with a chabura. So obviously, if the Torah is specifying chabura, that means that the kviya was something else. Must mean megal the kviya was without chabura. So those are the two opinions. And the first mahalach said it like this way, Ben Azai and Rebbe. The second mahalach said it that way. But that's the structure of what's going on. And at the end of the day, it will come out the way the maskana, the Gemara learns in the maskana. Rebbe is the opinion that holds that kviya started off with a chabura, and then when you see chabura, it's megal it's kviya without a chabura. So Rebbe holds is our Mishnah. And you can be mechayiv on sar without nezek. That's this Gemara. Good. Then the Gemara says, Inami, with the sorry, parents.
What have we learned from all this?
The Gemara's back.
The Mishnah beginning said that it's Sar doesn't have.
But we want to know who is the Mishnah going according to. It's not going according to one of these two opinions. In the beginning of the Gemara, we thought it wasn't going according to Rebbe, and in the end of the Gemara, we say no, it fits with Rebbe. It does fit with Rebbe. It doesn't fit with Ben Azai, but we'd prefer that because Rebbe is the author of the Mishnah, the Mishnayos in general. So we prefer to say a mahalach, a pirush in the brisa that would fit Rebbe with the Mishnah. So the bottom line is that the Mishnah can fit with Rebbe. So we're clarifying, basically the Gemara is in a few places, we want to clarify who is the opinion in the Mishnah. It's not everybody. Not everybody agrees. But the way the Gemara says in the end, the Mishnah is in the opinion of Rebbe, but Ben Azai disagrees. Ben Azai would not be someone who just pokes their friend or burns them on the fingernail, according to Ben Azai, the Tana Ben Azai, and just cause it's tsar, there'd be no payment. Ben Azai requires tsar with nezek, but the Mishnah and Rebbe, who is Rebbe, can be mechayev tsar, can obligate tsar even without nezek. Any questions?
How would they, in those days, back when, how would they define the word bruise? Because if you burn yourself on say, going back then, maybe they smoked or whatever, put a cigarette burn on it.
Right.
It would cause a mark.
Right.
That'd be classified as a bruise.
I don't think so. I told you I'm not exactly sure where the fine line of a burn turns into a bruise. I'll leave that for you to discuss. Right, so there I think there's for sure a chabura. If you've chopped off someone's hand, chopped off someone's leg, all these kind of things, and there's for sure a chabura. I think only when it comes to, well, for example, Boishis for sure doesn't have a chabura, but that's, I guess, obvious. It's not going to have a chabura. But Tsar was obviously an ambiguous point. Tsar could have chabura, could not have chabura. I guess Nezik maybe B'derech Klal does have chabura, maybe. But
the first words out your mouth is out.
Yeah,
which is pain.
It hurts. Yeah. The Gemara now says an alternate teretz. Inami, another teretz. Maybe, you know what? Now we're going to go forget everything we've learned till now. We're going to now read the pasuk of kfiyah tachas kfiyah, and it means everything. It means also with a chabura and also without a chabura. Everybody agrees to that. That is not a machlokes Ben Azai according to this teretz of the Gemara. Everybody agrees kfiyah is with or without a chabura. We just started Pei Hey Amud Aleph. They're arguing about a klal uprat muruchakim ze mitzeh, that is further away. Now, one of the Yud Gimel Midos of Rebbe Yishmael that we're supposed to say every morning, one of them are klal uprat. What does it mean, klal uprat? It means when the Torah says a specific generalization. The Torah says a generalization which seemingly would include a lot of things. And then the Torah, after that, I'll give you the general rule first. Then the Torah, after that, listed a specific item or items. So the general rule is, Ein b'chlal elamashe b'prat. Even though Torah said a klal, but the prat comes, the specification comes afterwards and is mama'et. It means it minimizes. It's not a general klal everywhere. It's only the prat. So, for example, that's klal uprat. We'll use the example for us by us because that's what's going to be clear. The Torah starts off and says kfiyah tachas kfiyah, and we're learning now. Everybody holds that's kfiyah, all inclusive, including with a chabura and including without the chabura. That's the klal over here, and the prat is the end of the verse says chabura tachas chabura. Chabura clearly means chabura, so that means you have a klal uprat. The beginning of the pasuk was a klal; it included all kinds of kfiyahs with a chabura and without a chabura. And the end of the pasuk is a prat, which is only a chabura, and we should say ein bichlal elamashe b'prat. The prat comes to be mama'et the klal. The prat comes to minimalize the klal, and you're only chayev with a chabura. That's what we should say. Only it's not so simple over here because, as the Gemara says, it's klal uprat hamuruchakim zeh mizeh. They're far away from each other. Why are they far? They're not so far. but they are far because in between kviya tachas kviya and the end of the verse of chabura tachas chabura, we have the three words petza tachas petza. That's mafsik. That divides between the beginning of the klal of kviya tachas kviya and the prat of chabura tachas chabura. And the shaila over here is, in such a case where you have a division between the klal and the prat, do you say really the principle of klal prat? Do we say that the prat comes to minimalize the klal, or do we say no, there's something in between? So the klal, the prat does not come to minimalize the klal. Only if the prat's next to the klal does it minimalize the klal. So that's the machlokas over here, as the Gemara is going to say. Rebbe Sava, Rebbe holds, Ein danin oisoi b'klalu prat. We do not learn it, danin, we do not learn it as a klalu prat, because Rebbe holds as a hefsik. The petza tachas petza in the middle is a hefsik, that will divide it. It's not a klalu prat. So what are we left with? Only a klal. The klal is, we said that kviya, this answer held, kviya is with a chabura or even without a chabura. So Rebbe would hold Yechayev with or without a chabura. So again, the Mishnah would fit with Rebbe very nicely, because Rebbe holds that Yechayev even without a chabura, even only for a kviya. Whereas Ben Azai Sava, danin oisoi b'chlalu prat. We do indeed judge it as a klalu prat. We learn it as a klalu prat, and therefore Ben Azai holds, even though there's a hefsik here, we ignore the hefsik and we use the principle, the midah of klalu prat, to teach me that the prat is minimalizing the klal, and therefore you're only going to be chayv with the chabura. The prat of chabura minimalizes the klal of kviya, and it tells me you're only chayv with the chabura, and therefore Ben Azai only is mechayiv you with the kviya with the chabura, and not just the kviya by itself. And the Mishnah would not fit according to Ben Azai. So again, the structure is a little bit different over here, but the bottom line is the same, that the Mishnah will fit with Rebbe, but for a different reason. Then the point of dispute is not whether the word kviya has a mashmois of. Before we thought the machloikus was, does kviya have chabura or not have chabura? And from there, everything went on, as we spoke about. Now we're saying that's not the dispute. Everybody holds kviya's mashma, even without a chabura, with or without a chabura, both way rounds. The shaila is, do we say that the end of the verse minimalizes that? Why should it? Because they have a principle called klalu prat, that the prat minimalizes the klal normally. Over here, why is it questionable? Because there's a hefsik in the middle of petza tachas petza, and the machloikus is, does that hefsik in the middle break the rule of klalu prat? And it's just really a klal over here. That's what Rebbe holds, and we're left with the klal that kviya means even with or without a chabura, and therefore the Mishnah's Rebbe. But Ben Azai holds, no. Ben Azai holds that we do judge it as a klalu prat, and the prat does minimalize the klal, and therefore you only be chayiv with a kviya with a chabura, and the Mishnah does not fit with Ben Azai. That's the end of this Gemara about kviya and chabura.
Is under the skin is congealed blood under the skin, and that's what a chabura is.
Oh, and a burn could cause that.
Yeah, burn could cause that, but it's only normally it's just superficial.
Right. So a burn without kviya is just on the skin surface, and a burn with a chabura, kviya without a chabura is just on the skin surface. Kviya with a chabura is that the skin underneath is blood congealed. That's the definition.
So the generalization is a burn, and the specification is whether it causes a bruise or
exactly.
Causes a bruise.
That is correct. That is correct. The generalization was a burn which includes all types of burn, even with the congealed blood skin underneath. Yes. And the specification is only the congealed blood. Right, exactly. And the question is, do we apply the rule that the specification minimalizes the generalization or not? Because there is a potential hefsik in the between the generalization and the specification. Yeah, that's good. Should we stop here for today? Okay, okay. We'll make a start with 5 minutes. We'll make a start. That's good. The Mishnah said into the question, what? Calculate payment. Exactly. How do you calculate the tzar? Right, Yosef, do you want to give the shiur tomorrow? You want to give the shiur tomorrow? Oh, tomorrow's Friday, Sunday. Okay, so the Mishnah says
Tomorrow.
the Mishnah says, how do we evaluate tzar? So the Mishnah said the following term. Again, but the Mishnah was speaking specifically about a tzar where there was no nezik. Remember that. That's quite important. So we say, Kama Adam Kyoitzi Bezeh Roitze Litoin Liyois Mitzayar Kach. The Mishnah said, in order to evaluate tzar, we take a person Kyoitzi Bezeh What does it mean? Of the same kind of strength, or age group or strength. You don't want to evaluate it with a super bodybuilder because then the tsar will be minimal. The same average kind of strength of this guy, how much would he take to take such pain? So if someone burnt you on the fingernail, you go and you make a survey in the sugar. How much would a person take money if I was going to pay you to burn your fingernail? Right? That's how much tsar is. Right? Person would take, I don't know, 1,000, 2,000 shekels, 500 shekels, I don't know. Person would take a certain amount of money to get that amount of pain on the fingernail. That's the amount that tsar is. That's what the Mishnah says. Now the Gemara is discussing another question. Tsar b'mokum nezek heichi shaymina. And this is maybe a thought that we will leave with. The Gemara is asking tsar b'mokum nezek heichi shaymina. What does it mean b'mokum nezek? It means when there was nezek as well, as we just spoke out. When there was nezek as well, nezek you evaluate by looking at it as if he was an eved, how much he sold with the arm and how much he was sold without the arm. How do you evaluate tsar in this case? Now, why is the Gemara asking how do you evaluate tsar in this case? There's a very interesting thing Rashi says. I'm not sure if I fully know how it's quite a big chiddush how to understand it, but Rashi over here and Rashi on the Chumash seems to say a similar thing. When you pay for nezek, what you're basically doing is paying for the person's arm, right? At the end of the day, once you've paid, how much was he going to be worth when he had two arms? Once you've cut one arm off, how much is it going to be worth for one arm? So you basically paid for his arm. So therefore, once you've paid for his arm, the question is, it's not so simple. You should be paying tsar anymore because you've paid for his arm, so to speak, and you have some sort of right to. You had some sort of right to cut off his hand. You don't have the right to do it for sure not. But once you've cut off his hand, then it's keilu you own his hand. So therefore, why should you be paying tsar? Let me just see that Rashi says it. Rashi says heichi shamina, and if you see Rashi, heichi shamina esat tsar. How do you evaluate the tsar? Right, you're paying him nezek to cut off his hand, so to speak. So why should he be paying in addition to that tsar? That's what the Gemara is asking right now. We'll pick up from here on Sunday. The Mishnah again was dealing with a case where there was only tsar involved, so you don't pay nezek. So then it's clear you pay the tsar. But when you're paying nezek in a certain degree, you bought the arm, you paid for the arm, you finished all the damages to pay for the arm. So why should you be paying on top of that tsar? That's what the Gemara is asking. Start with that on Sunday.